Good afternoon, Benjamin Lowy. Welcome on VH Berries.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. Appreciate being here.
Right now, you're living in the very special location based in Texas.
I'm not sure how special it is, but yes, I am living in Texas. I relocated here about eight months ago, so still getting to know where I live exactly. As a lifelong New Yorker, coming to Texas is a little bit of a culture shock. So
The town is called McAllen, and this is very close to the border and a city called Reynosa.
yes, where I just was 2 days ago. Yeah, so I'm about 20 minutes less probably from the border. Reynosa is just a drive over. You stop in a parking lot near a burger restaurant, and there's the border, and you can just cross over. And then all around us is the border wall. And this is a spot where a lot of migrants work their way over the border to come to the U.S.
And this location gives you a sort of advantage because it's really easy for you to cover some social and political subject, such as the migrants. Can you tell us about the mission you've been through?
Well, the reason we moved down here wasn't necessarily to do this, to work on the migrant story. I think it's a fact of life here, and it's something that my wife and I, who we work together quite a bit, sink our teeth into. But one of the reasons we moved down here was to actually, during COVID, was to take care of my mother-in-law who lives here. Believe it or not, this is a kind of a remoter area of the U.S. Mexican border called the Rio Grande Valley. It has a very large population of Filipino and Indian migrants who are about 2 generations old, who came originally. There was an easier way, if you were a doctor or in the medical profession, to get a visa to come to the U.S., which was working in the medical field in underserved communities. So a lot of my mother-in-law and my wife and all her family are Filipino, and they actually, her sister-in-law came here as a doctor, 25 years ago, and kind of brought my mother-in-law with her, but eventually she's the last one here. So the reason we moved down here was just to really take care of my mother-in-law during COVID, and kind of just a change of pace from New York. But it has the added part of like being right in the middle of this story of the migrants that are happening. I do have to work on my Spanish because it's not as great as it should be in order to do this story effectively. But about an hour and a half away from me driving west is an area called Roma, where a lot of the borderland along the Rio Grande River, or Mexicans call it the Rio Bravo River, is privately owned land. And that is where a lot of migrants will cross over in inflatable kayaks and kind of make this trip over to the U.S. And so that's like a big crossing point that I've been working on in the last few months, as well as you have something like Reynosa, which is a quite dangerous area to go to in general. And I don't go there lightly or by myself. But there is a park right as you exit the border area that is just filled with tents right now. That a lot of migrants from all different parts of Central America kind of congregate to, who don't cross over on their own.
This is very inspiring, Benjamin Lowy, because through your career as a photographer, you have this very special relationship with risk. And for example, concerning this expedition, you were waking up at night, driving to the borders to film and record the migrants while they were crossing the border with 8K video footage at a very high frame rate.
Yeah. Well, There are two things to unpack there. One, throughout my career, I have done a lot of things that I guess my mother would say was not a good idea, or taken certain risks that I felt were either important to the story or driven by the fact that I needed to do this professionally. But in a lot of ways, you can't show people what they, if everyone could see the same thing, then our job as journalists, as image makers, would not be that important. And I think part of why we need to make images in kind of riskier situations are because those are the situations that most people wouldn't put themselves in. And those are the things that they need to see. And it's not even necessarily risk as much as it's just the kind of photographing elements in the world that most people don't get to see. And the only way that they're going to be informed is by a select few people making those images or taking the time to make those images. Part of the reason, that image making is so much more prevalent now, and I think why people have such a higher visual vocabulary is because there's more access to image making and because there is more technology. We all have cameras now in our pockets connected to our smartphones. And I think in the West, we see close to 6,000 images a day, most people, just because it's so prevalent and it's always in our face. So for me, it's trying to also use the technology. And I think technology is a very important way to talk to people, is to stay ahead of the game and sort of understanding what's out there. And whether it was me using the iPhone to photograph in Afghanistan or in Libya when social media first began, or to now using an 8K camera but shooting at higher frame rates so that I can make stills, high resolution stills, as well as video at the same time, to give myself more content and more of an ability to hit people. So whether or not some people see those images as stills or some people see it as video content somewhere else, you have the ability to reach more people, which ultimately is what, as image makers, we want to do. And you have to unpack the ego side of being a photographer or having a point of view. Like, there's a reason why I kneel and I make this image, why I stand and I make this image. And composition and the way we frame things is based on ego, based on who we are, and as a product of all the experiences we've had. So there's part of that in the creation of imagery. But ultimately, what's the point of making those images if no one's going to see it and share in the vision?
Tell me about the process at the very beginning, because for these missions you were working alone, but I believe that you had some help from fixers or the media to know the exact locations and to get a little help.
Well, I think in photography and in journalism, for the most part, not maybe investigative journalism, but at least from the image making side of things, there's great camaraderie between image makers. And I think when you're approaching a situation like breaking news, or when you're in a conflict zone, there is a lot of talking between colleagues and teaming up. And because we all know, and I think we're all mature enough to understand that we're all working for different people, we all see the world differently, and we all help each other out. So in many ways, like when I go to a place like that, I'll call another colleague, be like, are you there? Do you want to go? A lot of times you team up with people. You don't, especially in dangerous situations when you're starting to get the hang of it, you don't go by yourself. There have been times where I have gone by myself to many things after understanding or going there before with colleagues. It really depends on the situation and what you're doing. With going to Roma late at night, there's always another photographer there, or we'll coordinate. There have been times I've been there by myself, but there have also been times, and many times, that I've been there with fellow photographers from different wire services or newspapers or magazines.
And as you mentioned, Benjamin Lowy, you've been going back and forth through different places and location. I believe that this is the key to remain creative.
Oh, 100%. I think it's so hard to photograph the same thing over and over again. And that could be the genre that you photograph and the content and the subject matter. I mean, in between covering all of the migrants crossing, my wife and I have been working on a story about the endangered sea turtles nesting period in South Padre Island, which is to the east of us, complete opposite direction of the migrants. And so, some weeks we're out there sleeping in our car in a tent and like photographing and shooting video late at night of like sea turtles coming out of their nests. And then, the next night it's back to covering the migrants, or it's even photographing, our kids, which we do a lot of. I shoot a lot of underwater. I just finished an underwater assignment for a magazine here in Texas. So there's a lot, for me at least, I'm comfortable in having this big spread of having different things to photograph, which keeps my creative juices flowing, I guess would be the best way to say it.
Of course, yeah. And since the beginning, you've mentioned your wife and work partner about 3 times. So
yeah, well, I can't not mention that. That would be dangerous if I didn't mention my wife.
So her name is Morvi Laker. Can you tell us about how you met and your relationship every day working to create the best images?
Yeah, we met initially. She tells the story much better than I, but we met once online where it was a big conversation. I was in Iraq, and there were a couple of I was a very young photographer when I was in Iraq in 2003. I was 23 years old, and I think when I was 24, there was an online conversation with some people back in the States, and she was a young, a photojournalist that was working in New York. And then we met at the Eddie Adams workshop, but we didn't really meet. We kind of like went in passing, and then we ended up having a date when I was home from Iraq for one night before flying off to Haiti to cover the rebel push against Aristide in 2004. So, we had a quick date at a Starbucks coffee shop, and I'm not really even sure how much we really liked each other. But when I came back from Haiti in 2004, we just decided to start dating, and we've been together since. We've been married, 16 years now. And there was a time when, she was her own photojournalist and I was my own photojournalist, and we were separate and we didn't work together. And then we had kids, and we tried, and then it was just me kind of traveling a lot, trying to pay the bills for all of us. And she was managing a lot of it. And I think I had to understand that, having kids took her out of the equation of being professional, and she had a lot of more to give the world. And so when our kids were old enough, we started really trying to work together, and I wanted to be conscious of how I could let her kind of get back to her creative game. And so we started doing a lot of work together, and we started making short movies, and she's really the director and the brains behind it, and I just carry the equipment and point the camera at things. So we really do work more tandem now, where she just tells me what to do and I do it, which is how any good relationship works.
This is a fantastic breakdown because, as you mentioned, you started covering Iraq the Iraq War just after graduating, which is something very, very uncommon.
Yeah, I was very impatient to become what I thought I wanted to become. So when I discovered photography and photojournalism, I was a junior in university, in my third year, and I really didn't know where to go or how to become what I thought I wanted to be. I took time off from school. I was actually living in Paris. I ended up going to Israel and Palestine to cover the beginning of the Intifada in late 2001, 2002. Or 2001 and 2002. And then, coming back to school and just doing a thesis, I lived in a homeless shelter for about 5 months. Kind of, looking back on it, it might have been a cliche approach to figuring out what I thought I was supposed to do or how to create the imagery that I saw around me, which was only from kind of one viewpoint, as a voyeur looking in on the other. But it was instrumental in kind of teaching me many things, not just about myself, but about the profession I was getting into. And I ended up, finding myself in the right spot and making myself available to take advantage of certain situations that led me to Iraq as a young photographer working for Corbis. So the way the story goes was that there was a photographer who I will not name who couldn't get a visa to go to Kuwait because of his own nationality, and every other photographer from Corbis, which used to be Bill Gates's photo agency, had decided to go unilaterally into Iraq, which was not embedding with U.S. forces, because most of those photographers had already done the same thing with the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001 after 9/11, and they thought, oh, we could do this with Iraq. And so I walked into the office, Corbis. I was actually looking for an office job. I think I had $7.35 left in my bank account. And I really didn't want to get a job as like a waiter or anything. So I went into Corbis looking for an office job, and the photo editor there at the time, David Laidler, he was like, well, we don't have anyone going to Iraq right now because this photographer can't get a visa. Do you want to go? You're going to have to tell me right now. And I said, yes, I will go. I actually did not even really know what I was doing. I kind of had to call another photographer and ask them what to pack. It was all very new, but I was very ambitious to kind of attain this goal that I thought I had wanted for so long. Be this war photographer working for these big magazines, covering these monumental events. That's what I got into it for. So I did kind of attain that goal really early on.
You attained your goals because looking back, you've stayed in Iraq from 2003 to 2008, so nearly 5 years. Yeah,
I worked there quite a bit over the years. I mean, I went home. I did other things. I guess as a journalist, you have the option to leave as compared to a soldier or an Iraqi. But I kept on going back and covering that, and covering Iraq for a really long time, until I just had too many close calls and too many injuries, and I just decided that enough was enough. And so I ended up spending more time in Afghanistan after that because that was a good decision. But like my experience in Afghanistan, which people have been asking me of late because of everything that's going on in Afghanistan right now, currently, was completely different than my experience in Iraq. And I never once felt in danger in Afghanistan. I was never once in kind of a dicey situation. I didn't even do any embeds with NATO or U.S. forces in Afghanistan. I've kind of worked on just doing features, and it was a very different experience of covering Afghanistan than it was covering Iraq. And it really opens my eyes to my approach to covering conflict zones, or just in general covering. Being a photographer, I think when you grow up, not grow up, but when you develop our eye, especially the Western gaze, we have this idea of what true photojournalism is, of how the tropes that we pay attention to. And I think we get used to that, and we don't push that because we think that is what photojournalism is. And I think it took really kind of exploring the lighter side of life in Afghanistan and doing features to really understand that there's more. There's not just the horror of the world that needs to be photographed. There's also the beautiful parts too.
Benjamin Lowy, you just mentioned the fact that you were exhausted about the injuries in Iraq. Can you tell us about it? Because it catches my attention.
Yeah, I mean, besides from, I think the mental trauma that everyone is going to take back from being in a war zone. I mean, most people don't see dead, tortured bodies or respond to bombings and raids on a daily basis, and this was something I saw a lot of, and I think that creates its own trauma and its own injury, and the images that are seared into my mind for the rest of my life, that has its own thing. I think probably one of the only things that people have been in war zones or in conflict zones or in disasters understand is a sense of smell that comes with those places, where you can sit down and watch a Hollywood action movie and it could be gratuitously violent, but you'll never really understand what it's like because you're not smelling. And that's something that sticks with me. But besides from the mental trauma of it, yeah, I was in a few different bomb blasts over the years, and two of them really injured my leg and my knee, and some of the nerve endings in my back. And that's been continuous thing where I've had multiple surgeries on my leg, and eventually I'm just going to have to replace my knee. I think they want to do it now, but I'm 40 and I think I'm too young to do that. But it was just like my body hurts. I had my elbow in my left hand, left arm reconstructed. So there's a lot of injuries that came out of different events that happened in Iraq. So.
Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Haiti, Darfur.
Some of the places, yeah. I mean, and then there are ones that I didn't spend a lot of time in, but that leave a lasting impression. 2013 Christmas, I was working for ESPN, and I was in South Sudan in Juba doing a wrestling piece of all things, and civil war broke out and the country fell apart. I stayed for a few days to report because why not? I thought it was important and no one else was there. But even then, I had to be evacuated out of there. So there are lots of places that I've been over the years that have left their mark.
And Benjamin Lowy, on another side that is more positive, these last 5 years, for example, you've made some photograph for some presidential candidates such as Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, or more, but also some personalities like Elon Musk or Jake Paul.
Yeah, well, Jake Paul was recent, and he won last night his boxing match, which I can't believe. Yeah, I again, like I try and diversify and I try and figure out. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, yes, I'm a photographer, and yes, I have this art that I want to excel at, but I also have to, pay for my children's Lego and pay the bills. So I still have to work, and I think one of the things about photography is while the editorial world is going through this monumental shift, advertising is going through this monumental shift. Not everyone knows where money is going to come from. People are trying to do NFTs and sell art, and people want you to give away your images for free. I think that, I'm always trying to diversify and do as much as I can. And so part of that is also going to be, doing portraits. And so I made myself available to do, portraits and try and do that as much as possible as well.
And you make, as you mentioned, yourself available because you value photography as a license to all of your hobbies.
100%. I think as I've grown and as I've matured, and I understand that photography is an amazing license to experience so much of the world. And if we just limit ourselves to one genre or one thing, you don't get to see so many different things. Like I've done the Olympics and I've done the American Super Bowls, like 5 of them. But then I've also done like Paris Fashion Week, and I've done underwater work and swam with great white sharks. I've done penguins on the tip of Antarctica. Like these are, and having photography be as a license, basically as a vehicle that gets me to experience all these different things, that makes my life fuller, makes my experiences fuller, and probably, I hope, makes me a somewhat better person, and ultimately a better father, because that's kind of the reason I think I understand why I would do any of this anyways, is to just impart some of this to my kids.
And can you tell me about the process and the meetings that you had with some of these personalities? For example, you went in the SpaceX headquarters to photograph Elon Musk. Can you tell us about it?
I remember sitting in his room, in a conference room with him, because I was also doing day in the life photographs. And kind of getting the sense of what his life was like, of what his work day was like. And I sat in a conference room with him and about 18 other, rocket scientists, literal rocket scientists. And they're talking about thrust coefficients and fuel and parabolas and talking heavy, math and trying to figure out, escape velocity vector. I don't know. I'm just throwing out words here. And I was like, I'm literally sitting, I'm the dumbest person in this room right now. Like I got through calculus and maybe, by cheating in high school. So, I remember that. But, when I lined up the picture to take of him in the fuselage, we had to make sure that there was really nothing else visible. There was a photograph that I did of him in one of the early fuselage designs, and they just remember that their PR people were trying to make sure that there was nothing else visible in the frame that anyone else, any of their people would have a problem with, or that, industrial espionage. They just were like, you have to make sure that there's nothing else in there. So I remember every time I took a picture of him in the SpaceX facility, we had to look at the back of my camera to make sure that it was all kosher for them.
And working for some television and broadcasting channels, you did also some portraits. And I believe that for this is another type of exercise, because the portrait that you are going to take will be displayed on every television for the polls and the result.
Yeah, so that was actually a fun project where I worked for CNN and for Turner of photographing everyone who was going to run for president. But because so many people were running early in 2019, there were close to 30 people that I had to photograph. And I had this roving studio that we set up with a certain number of lights, and to create the same kind of look that we would bring to every space. So we had to measure all the lights and measure the baffling and measure the seamless, because we wanted the portrait to look the same no matter where we were photographing. And then we also had to shoot video content for TV as well. The same thing. So still photograph and then a video portrait, and they all had to be done seamlessly, because obviously these are politicians and don't have a lot of time to be photographed.
And I'm very curious about your skills to direct all the models and public figure. What is your secret?
There's no secret to directing people. I do dress outrageously, so I found a company that makes these like flowery, ridiculous blazers, because I would show up in a tie, in a blazer and a tie and try and look presentable, but I wear like the craziest colorful tie and this crazy blazer that is just like flowers everywhere, and it's like gold thread. It's like what you would imagine the most cliche American prom night kind of clothing that somebody flamboyant would wear. And I found a place that sold these, and I was like, I have to wear this. So it was a talking point. So whenever anybody walked in, they're like, whoa, that is the loudest jacket I have ever seen. And right there, that broke the ice. That was my initial foray into talking with people. We'd break into stories, or we would, I had the same assistants, and we would always banter with who we were photographing. You just have to find a way to talk to them, a certain commonality. I think Joe Biden was great, President Biden. After I photographed him, he's like, you photographers, you're like the most powerful people in the world. You're telling like world leaders and presidents and congressmen and senators to like look this way and look this way and do this and do that and stop, smile. And he's like, you're so powerful. I was like, I'm only powerful for 5 minutes, and I can't launch the nuclear weapons. So we would just have this funny banter back and forth with whoever. I think one of the, I'm not going to say who it was, but told me that like he still doesn't really know how to make a tie very well, and he had someone else make his tie for him and slips it over his head. Little funny things. Or Andrew Yang, who had also run for and lost the New York City mayor last month. I asked him what music he wanted to listen to, and he said Depeche Mode, which is straight up late 80s, early 90s music, which is a little bit of a place in my heart. But or even Bill de Blasio, who is the mayor of New York now, who for a hot second thought he was going to run for president. He was like, if I become president, what do you want? And I was like, release the aliens from Area 51. He's like, done. Just simple, off the cuff remarks always worked with finding something to talk about with people. At the end of the day, they're just people.
So Benjamin Lowy, having a very special and different outfits can be very great to catch their attention, and also, as you mentioned, using small talk.
Oh, 100%. As a photojournalist, and you're walking in a war zone, a lot of times there's this uniform that people wear, an unspoken uniform, with a type of camera strap or the type of camera bag, or everyone wears a scarf. Don't know why that is, because it's really hot. But there's you don't wear flamboyant, outrageous clothes. And I think as I got older, I just sort of embraced being more flamboyant. I have more Hawaiian shirts and outrageous colors, and like my pink shirt with this teddy bear I'm wearing right now. I just have embraced this idea of I'm like, whatever. I actually want to stand out now. I'll put it more this way. When I started as a photographer, I wanted the biggest camera with the longest lens and the lens hood, and I wanted everyone to know that I was a photojournalist. And don't smile. I'm taking your picture. You're not supposed to smile. I'm not a tourist. I wear the camera only on my shoulder. And I think as I got older, I realized how silly that is, and how much of that is baked into the community of what you're supposed to be as this rugged photojournalist. And now I actually want to look like a touristy dad. And, I'll wear socks with my sandals. I'll have my Hawaiian shirt. I'll have my camera around my neck, and people won't give me a second thought. And that's what I want, because that's when I'm able to make the best types of images.
You are definitely standing up and embracing the future. So what are the upcoming projects of Benjamin Lowy?
Right now it's surviving COVID and doing it safely. I think now that I'm living on this border area, my wife and I are going to work on more border stories. I still am working with doing more underwater stuff with our kids. So one of the last projects we did with both my kids narrated a piece for National Geographic Shark Fest, where they're very young and they went in the water with great white sharks, and then they interviewed a marine biologist. And I think we're looking for what that next story for them is going to be. As travel opens up, kind of exploring and having them go out into the world. I think it's very important from my perspective as an American, where we have certain issues that are prolific in our culture and society, is that my kids are interracial. Not only are they interracial, they're interreligious. I'm a white Jewish guy. My wife is a Filipino, a dark-skinned Filipino, Methodist, and we're raising our kids to be everything. And I think that there needs to be a voice where they can go out and kind of talk to people about saying, hey, we're not from this one place, we're from every place, and kind of experience this country in that way. And I think that's an important voice in the mix, especially these days when we're trying, I think, as a community to be more open to understanding that there are many different experiences for many different types of people. And the only way to bridge some of these differences is through commonality. And that's a lot of what I want to give them, and my wife want to give them. So that's something that we're working on. I take a lot of solace in doing underwater work as well, just for myself, and diving and actually not having to talk to anyone and just being alone in a completely alien world where, fish and sharks and sea lions and sea turtles, and they do not care about our politics, about what camera we're using. 8K, 4K, it doesn't matter to them. There's something relaxing and therapeutic about being in that world as well. And that's that's important to me too.
One thing that I know for sure is that you will always be in mission, because this is a name of a city in the Hidalgo County next to McAllen.
Yep, it's right around the corner. It's right around the corner. So, interestingly enough, it's where one of the first missions was established along the border in this area, and I guess the name stuck. So it's the mission itself that was established by the church here. That's where the city gets its name from, and that mission is still here. I mean, it must be really. I actually have to look it up in Wikipedia. It's still there, and there's still someone who operates the mission. But that's where the name of the city comes from. It's from the original first mission that was established down here.
Thank you so much, Benjamin Lowy.
No, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it.